Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Jessie Talley, and I'm back with part two of how to start your semester off strong as a new faculty member. And of course, I'm your faculty coach. And so today we're going to be talking about how to establish clear communication with your students. And so this is important, especially as you're going through the semester before you get into your research, right? The other thing that you have to do is your teaching. And so you want to make sure, even if you're doing research, but even with teaching as well, that you have a good rapport with your students. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it. So the first question I want you to ask yourself as you're going through, you can continue thinking about this as we go through some of the things I want to help with your communication with your students today to tell you about in terms of tips and give you some insights is what does your communication look like with your students? So you may have been a TA before you got your tenure track position. So you may have some interaction with students. But of course, that's going to be different now that you're in a professor role. And so you want to think about how do you want communication to look like between you and the students. And so that's something that you should kind of keep in your mind as we go through some of these tips or some things and areas for you to consider as we go along. Okay, so the first thing is the communication channel. So there are different ways that you can communicate with your students. The main basic level is through email, right? And so you want to determine um, which particular communication strategy is best for you to communicate with the students. So one, you have email, you have your learning management system, and some people do allow students to text message them. They allow some students to have a number where they can reach out to them. They can also use your phone in your office, and you may have some other ways, discussion boards, things of that nature. So for me, I like to kind of keep students in the learning management system because most of the time their questions are related to something in there about an assignment. And so what that allows me to do is to just kind of, keep everybody siloed to that. And that way I can go directly to what they're talking about, see what's going on, and try to limit emails to really like personal matters. So if there's a death in the family or if it's something else, they're sick or something really major going on, or if they want to talk about um, some type of grade issue or things of that nature. I try to leave those important things to email and leave everything else to learn a management system because then I'm able to actually go in and look at the information. You also may want to communicate with your students through office hours, which is really big. And so now, since we're still in the pandemic, but we're kind of like winding down a little bit in terms of how that looks, a lot of people are now used to doing virtual. So you can have hybrid, you can have strictly in person, you can have in person, and you can have virtual office hours. But I also noticed that students, they love to have a virtual option because it's a little bit flexible determining where they are at the particular time. They may not be able to come to you in person, but at least virtually they're still able to kind of like dial in from wherever they are. And that makes it more accessible to you as well. Another program that I use also that has a free version, but you can also do a paid version, which is something called Video Ads. And so that's a way where you can create a video that's about a couple of seconds long to just say, hey, this is the video for office hours this week. Or you can tailor it to your class. So if you're teaching statistics or something like that, say, hey, we talked about this topic in statistics. Drop me a line if you have a question. And the students are able to respond via a text message. They can also respond back by video, but they can also respond back by audio. And that just is another way outside of my office hours that I allow people to kind of communicate with me, and I'll get to it when I have the time. And so those notifications come straight to my email. So those are some different communication channels that you're able to use. So then, once you know the communications channels that you want to use, you want to start thinking about what are the communication expectations. So that's from your perspective and from the student's perspective, right? So that means how long is it going to take you to respond to any type of communication that they do? Some people try to say 24 to 48 hours that they respond, which is a general, I guess, rule or general thought process in terms of responding to students so that they don't feel like they're hanging or waiting by the wayside. But you can determine what that communication is going to be. And the fact that you have these different communication channels, you can express to the student which channel to use at different times, which will allow them to kind of know like they still have accessibility to you, even if it's not right away. So that's kind of going back to the app I just talked about, the video ask. If I'm not doing office hours, it's still a way for them to communicate with me that isn't so like hands on and maybe like a quick question I can shoot them back a line if I have a moment that's not during my office hours time or that's off, office hours time. Then I have like discussion boards I put in there to just be like, hey, drop a question in there because I'm going to go in and check to see if people have done assignments to start grading. So I may have something there that somebody might want to reach out to me and I can check that at a specific time. Or email if it's something urgent. I may respond, fairly fast to that to kind of get some more information and connect with the student on what to do. Or with the learning management system, I'm definitely going to check that every day because that's the main point of contact for me, as an example for my students. The other thing is you have to determine how often do you want them to kind of reach out. So for example, for me, I try to kind of limit over the weekend because sometimes as professors, we're trying to catch back up or not. We're trying to take a break, right? Get some rest. And so I normally tell my students, like, if they don't send me something on Friday by this time, then they won't get a response until Monday when I get back to work. And that's just to kind of give me some downtime, time, but to also let them know, like, I'm not on call. You also may want to have a cutoff time for when you respond to messages, unless it's, like I said, something urgent or something you feel like you have to respond to based on what the student is asking you. But in general, I try to just kind of keep that to after a certain time when I'm leaving the office, like I'm not going to look at any more emails to kind of give students like I'm not going to respond to them. But of course, with Google now, you can even schedule, so you can still respond but schedule it so you don't feel like they don't feel like that you're up 11. You might be up at 11, but you're not going to respond to them. So those are some things you want to think about, like what do those expectations look like, and keeping in mind as we talk about the channels and the expectations, what does communication look like with your students for you? Not necessarily for me, but how your process works. So the last thing is basically the student professor relationship, right? So outside of just these regular communication channels, right, we also need to think about inside of the classroom or even when we're working on research with students, like how do those relationships form? How do we connect with our students? How are we more inclusive, showing equity in our classrooms? And so there are many different ways from the types of icebreakers to the type of assignment to the type of collaboration we want to see in the classroom that we have a clear role in with the students to kind of form and shape how that looks so that they can have a good experience in a class, that they get all the information that they're supposed to get, that they learn what they're supposed to learn, but that we also develop a good rapport with them. So I think in another video I had mentioned that sometimes in terms of the syllabus or different policies in the classrooms, students work with professors work with students to kind of develop that together so they feel like they have some ownership as well. And some professors prefer more like they set those and then they have the students kind of come in. And there may also be certain times where, in terms of the assignments or the way that you do the class, that you may get some input from the students to get more of what they want to see, right? Because if you're doing more of what they want to see or what they're interested in, along with what they need to know, then you may have more buy-in from the students. And so we just want to make sure that we're respectful, just like we want them to be respectful of us, that we're respectful to them, and that we have certain policies in place that we feel like are in alignment with our values and how we view the student professor relationship in the classroom and how we interact with each other and have some good decorum. So outside of that, if there is something going on, then of course this will eventually turn into a student professor admin relationship, right? Where you may have to bring up something that is kind of concerning to you, or you may not know how to do, and just kind of correspond to the student or put something in your syllabus that allows them to know, like, if the decorum is not on point, then you will be reaching out to your chair or someone else that can kind of help with that, to kind of talk with the student about what's going on with their behavior, or things that something that you're seeing that you don't feel like you're comfortable in handling. You need some outside help. And so it's important that you're able to tell the student that information so that they know what to expect. And so overall, setting those clear guidelines in your syllabus that we talked about in part one, and getting your course ready right is important, because the more students are clear about policies, work, what they need to do, the more apt they are to do it, but also to know that you care and that your communication style leads to accessibility. Because when students feel like they can access you, then they feel like you care. They also feel like you're more able to kind of like help them. They can come reach out to you at any point in time. And so they'll feel like they'll, do better in the class. But the less accessible you are, it kind of puts a damper on the class, how they feel about the teaching, and things of that nature. And all of the things are connected together. So when everything is kind of on point, then the student experience is better. And so I'm hoping that talking about some of these tips will be helpful to you, and thinking about what your communication plan is going to be. And along with sending out announcements and things of that nature, that's something else in terms of communication. Your students may not always look in the syllabus, so they do need that, especially if they're undergrad, they need that constant communication. So there are ways in your learning management system where you're able to schedule things to come out at specific times, which kind of gets back to what we were talking about in part one, right? With creating those materials and things of that nature. So you're able to actually like schedule out your communication ahead of time to be able to get some time back, but your students are staying on point, so you won't get frustrated if you don't see them doing certain assignments or completing certain things. And so that will be helpful. And so I'm looking forward so far to hearing about how you're doing with some of these tips in terms of creating your class. So drop me a line below and let me know what type of communication strategy you're going to try to implement this coming semester, and any questions that you may have. And as always, until next time, it's a pleasure. And we still have part three coming up next week. So I look forward to meeting you there on the page. But until next time, do your work, and I'll talk to you next time. Big energy loading.